Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Memorial Hospital's ICU hummed like dying insects. Lewis McCann sat in the plastic chair outside room 312, his right hand wrapped in gauze where the coffee burns had blistered his palm. The scalding liquid had done its job. Roger Wilkins was blind in one eye, possibly both, and under police guard 3 floors down. But Lewis wasn't thinking about Roger. He was thinking about the knife. It had been a custom piece. Lewis had seen enough blades in his years working offshore on oil rigs to know craftsmanship when he saw it. The handle was carved bone, the blade 8 inches of folded steel with a wicked curve. Not something you picked up at a gas station on impulse. Someone had commissioned that knife. Someone had planned this. His daughter Becky was asleep in the hospital room behind him, sedated after her screaming fit in the theater. She was 9 years old enough to understand that Grandpa Roger had tried to hurt them, too young to understand why. The police had been sympathetic but skeptical. Detective Santiago Ayala had taken his statement twice, each time circling back to the same questions. Had there been arguments with Roger? Financial disputes? Custody issues? Lewis had answered truthfully, no, no, and no. He and Caroline had been married for 11 years. Roger had always been distant, but never threatening. The old man lived alone in the family estate on the edge of town, surviving on his late wife's money and whatever he did in that basement workshop of his. Mr. McCann? A nurse approached, her name tag, reading Marcia Dodd. Your wife is here. Caroline appeared at the end of the hallway, still in her work clothes from the real estate office. Her face was composed, makeup perfect despite the late hour. That bothered Lewis. Their daughter had nearly been killed, and Caroline looked like she was heading to a client meeting. Is she okay? Caroline asked, not quite meeting his eyes. Sedated. Sleeping. Lewis studied his wife's face. Where were you? I called you 4 hours ago. Showing a property. I told you about it this morning, the Brennan estate. She brushed past him toward Becky's room. I came as soon as I could. Lewis caught her arm, gently but firmly. Roger had a knife, Caroline, a custom-made blade. He was sitting directly behind us, sharpening it during a kids' movie. Our daughter squeezed my hand so hard she left marks because she was too terrified to scream. Caroline's jaw tightened. My father is mentally ill, Lewis. You know he's been getting worse since Mom died. That knife wasn't made by a sick old man having an episode. That was premeditated. Lewis released her arm. What's going on? Nothing. You're in shock. Caroline opened the door to Becky's room. We'll talk when you calm down. The door clicked shut between them. Lewis stood there for a long moment, his burned hand throbbing. Then he took out his phone and called the one person in this town who might give him straight answers. Matthew Chase's auto shop smelled like motor oil and cigarettes. Lewis found him under a cherry red Mustang, cursing at a stubborn bolt. Matthew had been his best friend since high school, the kind of friend who would help you move a body first and ask questions later. Heard about the theater on the scanner, Matthew said, rolling out from under the car. He was built like a linebacker gone soft, grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. Coffee to the face. That's some quick thinking. It was hot coffee or my daughter's throat. Lewis leaned against the workbench. I need information, Matt. Quietly. Matthew sat up, suddenly serious. What kind of information? Roger Wilkins. What do you know about him? Besides the fact that he's a rich asshole who thinks his shit don't stink. Matthew grabbed a rag, wiping his hands. Not much. He keeps to himself. That old mansion on Sycamore? Nobody goes in or out except him and his lawyer. His lawyer? Yeah, Neil McKay. Real estate attorney. Handles Caroline's firm's contracts too. I've seen him at Roger's place a few times when I'm doing deliveries out that way. Matthew stood, stretching his back. Why? Lewis told him about the knife. About Caroline's strange reaction. About the feeling in his gut that this was bigger than a mentally ill old man snapping. Matthew listened, then walked to his office and pulled out a bottle of bourbon. He poured 2 fingers for each of them. Caroline ever mention her family having money problems? No, they're loaded. Roger's sitting on millions from his wife's inheritance. Then maybe it ain't about money. Matthew downed his bourbon. My cousin Derek works maintenance at Pinecrest Cemetery. Says Roger visits his wife's grave every Sunday, regular as clockwork. But here's the thing, He brings flowers for 2 graves. His wife's and who else's? A kid. Grave marker says beloved son. Name scratched off the stone, but the dates put the death about 12 years ago. Matthew refilled his glass. Year before you and Caroline got married. Louis felt something cold settle in his chest. Caroline never mentioned having a brother. Maybe she didn't. Maybe it's something else. Matthew looked at him. You want me to dig? Yeah, but carefully. I don't want Caroline knowing. She's your wife, man. I know. Louis set down his glass. That's what scares me. The next morning, Louis drove Becky home from the hospital. She sat in the back seat, quiet, clutching the stuffed rabbit he'd won for her at the county fair last summer. Caroline had stayed behind to handle the paperwork, which meant avoiding questions. Daddy, Becky's voice was small. Is Grandpa Roger going to come home? No, baby. He's going to stay somewhere safe where doctors can help him. Louis watched her in the rearview mirror. Did Grandpa ever do anything that scared you before? Becky was quiet for a long moment. Then, he asked me questions sometimes. What kind of questions? About you. If you're mean to Mommy. If you yelled at her. Becky hugged the rabbit tighter. He asked if I would be sad if you went away. Louis's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did he ask you that? Last time we visited, Mommy was in the bathroom, and Grandpa took me to see his workshop. He had lots of knives there. He said they were for protection. She paused. I didn't like his workshop. It smelled bad. Like what? Like when you're cleaning fish. But worse. Louis pulled into their driveway and sat for a moment, processing. Roger had been grooming his daughter, testing her, preparing her for something. In that workshop, his phone buzzed. A text from Matthew. Found something. Come by tonight. Alone. Louis helped Becky inside, made her favorite lunch, and set her up with cartoons. His mind was already planning, calculating. Whatever Roger had been doing, whatever Caroline was hiding, Louis was going to find out. And when he did, they were all going to wish he'd just stayed the victim. By the time the sun set, Louis McCann had made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for answers anymore. He was going to take them. Matthew's shop was closed when Louis arrived after dark. He parked in the back and knocked twice. Matthew let him in, and Louis immediately noticed the third man sitting at the desk. This is Derek Velasquez, Matthew said. My cousin. He's the one who found the grave. Derek was younger, maybe 25, with a wary look of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. I pulled the cemetery records, he said without preamble. The child buried next to Roger's wife? Name was Charlie. Charlie Wilkins. Died 12 years ago, age 7. Cause of death listed as accidental drowning. Caroline's brother, Louis said. Half-brother, maybe. But here's where it gets weird. Derek pulled out a folder. I did some digging in the county records. Roger Wilkins filed for divorce from his first wife 20 years ago. She died in a car accident 6 months later, before the divorce was finalized. Then Roger married Miriam Porter, Caroline's mother, within a year. Fast work. Yeah. And Miriam had money. Old money. Her family owned half the factories in this county before they sold out. Derek flipped through papers. Miriam died 3 years ago. Cancer. Left everything to Roger in her will. Caroline got nothing. Louis felt the pieces starting to connect. Caroline never mentioned being cut out. Because she wasn't supposed to know, Matthew said. That lawyer, McKay, he's the executor of Miriam's estate. And according to Derek's digging, there's a clause in the will. If Roger dies or is declared incompetent before Caroline's 40th birthday, everything goes to her. But only if she's still married with a child. The room went silent. I'm 37, Louis said slowly. Caroline turns 40 next month. And Becky is the required heir. Matthew poured another bourbon. Roger tries to kill you at a movie theater. You're gone. Caroline's a widow with a child. And when Roger inevitably gets declared incompetent for the murder, Caroline inherits everything. Except I'm not dead. Louis took the bourbon, didn't drink it. And Roger's in custody. Which means plan B, Derek said. Caroline needs you gone before her birthday. And she needs her father declared incompetent. You surviving might have actually accelerated their timeline. Louis thought about Caroline's composed face at the hospital. Her absence during the attack. The way she deflected his questions. She set this up. Looks like it. Then why the hell would Roger go along with it? He loses everything either way. Matthew and Derek exchanged looks. That's what we can't figure, Matthew said. Unless there's something else going on. Lewis stood, pacing. His mind was working now, fitting pieces together. Becky said the workshop smelled like rotting fish. But Roger doesn't fish. Never has. So what else smells like decomposition? Lewis pulled out his phone, searching. Caroline mentioned showing a property tonight. The Brennan estate. That's been abandoned for 5 years. Why show it now? Derek was already typing on his laptop. Property records show, holy shit. The Brennan estate is owned by a holding company. McKay's firm handles the paperwork. Can you find out who else has access? Give me 10 minutes. While Derek worked, Lewis called the hospital. The nurse, Marcia Dodd, answered on the third ring. Mr. McCann, is everything okay? I need to know if anyone's tried to see Roger Wilkins. Just his lawyer, Mr. McKay. He came by an hour ago, but the police wouldn't let him in without proper authorization. He left pretty upset. Did he say anything? Just that it was urgent family business. Something about paperwork that needed signing. Marcia lowered her voice. Between you and me, he seemed more angry than concerned. Lewis thanked her and hung up. Derek looked up from his laptop. Got it. The Brennan estate has 3 authorized key holders. Neil McKay, Caroline McCann, and... Derek trailed off. Who? Roger Wilkins. Authorization dated 6 months ago. Lewis felt everything click into place. They've been using that property for something. Something that required a remote location and Roger's expertise. Expertise in what? Matthew asked. Lewis remembered Becky's description of the workshop. The smell of decay. The knives. Roger's custom-made blade. Roger was a butcher before he married into money. Worked at his family's meat processing plant until it closed. The 3 men looked at each other. We need to see that property, Lewis said. Tonight. The Brennan estate sat on 40 acres of overgrown land. The main house, a rotting Victoria monstrosity that had been condemned after a fire gutted the west wing. Lewis, Matthew, and Derek parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, carrying flashlights and Matthew's tire iron. This is breaking and entering, Derek whispered. If we get caught. We won't. Lewis led them around the back, where a newer padlock secured the basement entrance. He examined it with his phone's light. This was installed recently. Matthew made quick work of the lock with bolt cutters from his truck. The basement door opened with a groan of rusty hinges. The smell hit them immediately, chemical and organic, exactly as Becky had described. Inside, Lewis's flashlight revealed a nightmare. The basement had been converted into a workshop. Stainless steel tables lined the walls. Knives of every size hung on pegboards. A chest freezer hummed in the corner. And on the tables, Jesus Christ, Matthew breathed. They weren't bodies. Not human ones. But the deer carcasses were hung and dressed with professional precision. The kind of butchery that required skill and practice. Lewis approached the freezer, his heart pounding. He opened it. Inside were packages wrapped in butcher paper, labeled and dated. All deer meat. Nothing more. I don't understand, Derek said. It's just a hunting operation. Illegal, but not. It's a cover. Lewis pointed to the far corner, where a tarp covered something large. He pulled it back, revealing a steel door set into the concrete floor. Another new padlock. This one took Matthew longer to open. When the door swung up, revealing stairs descending into darkness, Lewis could smell something different. Not decay. Something chemical. Industrial. They descended carefully. The underground room was small, maybe 10 by 10, with concrete walls and a single workbench. On the bench sat documents, photographs, and a laptop. Lewis opened the laptop. It wasn't password protected. Arrogant or stupid, he couldn't tell which. The desktop had one folder, insurance. Inside were hundreds of photos. Caroline with Neil McKay at restaurants, hotels, his apartment. The timestamps went back 3 years. Caroline and McKay weren't just having an affair. They were partners. But the documents were worse. Bank statements showing money flowing from Miriam's estate into offshore accounts, just small enough to avoid triggering audits. Property deeds being quietly transferred. And emails, dozens of emails between Caroline and McKay, planning not just Lewis's death, but Roger's murder afterward. They were going to kill Roger too, Lewis said, reading. Make it look like a murder-suicide. He kills me in a psychotic break. Caroline has him declared incompetent and inherits. Then Roger has an accident in the psychiatric facility. But Roger found out, Matthew said, reading over his shoulder. He's been gathering evidence. This whole hunting operation was his cover to build a case against them. Derek pointed to a series of photographs. Roger meeting with someone Lewis didn't recognize. Who's that? Lewis zoomed in on the image. The man was older, professional-looking, carrying a briefcase. In one photo, you could see a business card being exchanged. Detective Santiago Ayala's card, Lewis read. Roger was going to the police. Then why try to kill you at the theater? Lewis thought about it. About the knife, the sharpening, Becky's warning. What if he wasn't trying to kill me? What if he was trying to warn me? By sharpening a knife behind you? Think about it. Roger knows Caroline and McKay are planning to kill me. He can't go to the police without evidence, and he needs time to gather it. But Caroline moves up the timeline. Maybe she suspected he knew. Roger can't warn me directly. Caroline would know. So he stages something public, something that would put police attention on the family. Lewis paced. The knife was meant to scare us, make Becky alert me. He knew she'd see it. He wanted me to defend myself, create a scene, get police involved. That's insane, Derek said. Or brilliant, Matthew countered. If Lewis is dead, Caroline inherits, and Roger loses everything. If Lewis kills Roger in self-defense, Caroline still inherits, but Roger's evidence might surface. But if Roger just threatens Lewis publicly and gets arrested, Lewis is safe, Caroline can't make her move, and Roger has time in custody to negotiate with the police. Lewis pulled out his phone, copying files from the laptop. Except I threw coffee in his face and might have blinded him. Now he's under guard, can't talk to anyone, and Caroline thinks she still has time. What are you going to do? Derek asked. Lewis finished copying the files. I'm going to give her all the time she needs, and then I'm going to take everything from her. Over the next week, Lewis played the role of grieving, confused husband perfectly. He comforted Caroline, agreed to couples therapy to process the trauma, and even suggested taking Becky to visit a child psychologist. Caroline relaxed, believing she had him convinced that Roger was simply mentally ill. Behind the scenes, Lewis was moving pieces into place. First, he visited Roger in the hospital. The old man had lost one eye completely. The other was severely damaged. They communicated through written notes, with Lewis pretending to be a concerned son-in-law bringing comfort. I found your evidence, Lewis wrote. I know what Caroline and McKay are planning. Roger's good hand trembled as he wrote back. Protect Becky. That's all that matters. Why didn't you tell me? You wouldn't have believed me. Caroline had you fooled. Had everyone fooled. Roger's writing grew more shaky. I tried to make a scene. Wanted police involved. Protect you both. I'm going to stop them, Lewis wrote. But I need your help. Roger nodded, squeezing Lewis's hand with surprising strength. Second, Lewis met with Detective Ayala privately. The detective had been suspicious of the theater incident from the start. Roger's behavior didn't fit the pattern of a psychotic break. Lewis showed him everything. The photos, the emails, the bank statements. This is inadmissible, Ayala said, flipping through the evidence. Obtained through breaking and entering. Then get a warrant. Roger was gathering evidence. He has legal standing to compile information about his own estate. Ayala studied him. What do you want out of this, Mr. McCann? I want my daughter safe. I want Caroline and McKay to pay for what they tried to do. And I want Roger to be free. Roger assaulted you with a deadly weapon. Roger saved my life. Lewis met his eyes. Give me 2 weeks. Let Caroline think she's won. When she makes her next move, you'll have everything you need. Ayala considered. 2 weeks. But if anyone else gets hurt, they won't. Third, Lewis visited Neil McKay's office. The lawyer was smooth, professional, expressing concern for Lewis's family and offering free legal advice regarding Roger's estate. Lewis played dumb, asking questions about Miriam's will, inheritance laws, Caroline's rights. McKay took the bait beautifully, steering Lewis toward exactly the conclusions they wanted him to reach. that Roger was dangerous, that Caroline deserved the inheritance, that the family would be better off if Roger was declared incompetent. Caroline must be under tremendous stress, McKay said sympathetically. If there's anything I can do. Actually, Lewis said, there is. Caroline's birthday is coming up. I was thinking of throwing her a party. Something at the Brennan estate. I know it's abandoned, but Caroline mentioned you handle the property. Maybe we could rent it for the night. She always loved that old house. McKay's eyes flickered with something Lewis couldn't quite read. Interest? Suspicion? The Brennan estate is in poor condition, McKay said carefully. Even better, we could do a restoration theme. Caroline's in real estate. It would be nostalgic. Lewis smiled. Unless there's a reason, we shouldn't use that property. No reason at all. McKay relaxed. I'll make the arrangements. Hook set. Fourth, Lewis told Caroline about the party. She reacted exactly as he'd expected. Surprise, pleasure, and then a calculating look he'd learned to recognize. The Brennan estate, she said. That's sweet, Lewis. But it's a wreck. McKay said he could get it ready. And I thought, with everything that's happened, we could use something to celebrate. New beginnings. Caroline kissed him. Lewis let her, hating every second. You're wonderful, she said. I don't deserve you. No, Lewis agreed, smiling. You don't. That night, Lewis monitored Caroline's phone calls through the clone device Derek had helped him set up. She called McKay immediately. He wants to have a party at the estate, Caroline said. Next Saturday. That might work in our favor. McKay's voice was cold. The property's isolated. If something were to happen, an accident, a tragedy, husband plans a romantic gesture, something goes wrong. Faulty wiring in an old building, maybe. You try to save him, but... And Becky, with her grandparents for the weekend. You said your parents offered to take her. Lewis gripped his phone, forcing himself to stay calm. They were planning to murder him at his own wife's birthday party. What about Roger? Caroline asked. I'm working on it. Once Lewis is gone and you inherit, we can move Roger to a private facility. Something permanent. They finalized details. Lewis listened to every word, recording everything. When Caroline came to bed that night, Lewis pretended to be asleep. She curled against him, and he felt nothing but disgust. Only 6 more days. Lewis spent those 6 days preparing. He worked with Detective Ayala to set up surveillance at the Brennan estate. He convinced Caroline's parents, Buddy and Maxine Cummings, good people who'd never approved of their daughter's behavior, to take Becky for a special weekend, while refusing to tell them why. He trusted them to keep his daughter safe, but he couldn't risk them warning Caroline. He also visited Roger again, explaining his plan. The old man wept, his ruined eyes streaming tears. I'm sorry, Roger wrote. I should have stopped her years ago. After Charlie. What happened to Charlie? Lewis asked. Roger's hand shook as he wrote. Caroline was jealous. Miriam loved Charlie more. He was her son from her first marriage. Caroline was always second. When Charlie drowned in the pool, Caroline was there. She said it was an accident. Miriam never believed her. Changed the will to protect Charlie's memory. Left everything to me so Caroline couldn't touch it. That's why the inheritance clause. Miriam wanted Caroline to prove herself. Raise a child successfully. Be a good wife. Then she could have the money. But Caroline just learned to fake it better. Roger gripped Lewis's hand. I've known for years what she is. I just couldn't prove it. You try to protect me. I try to save myself. You and Becky were. I'm sorry. I was a coward. You're not a coward now. Roger managed a broken smile. On Saturday morning, Lewis drove to the Brennan estate alone. McKay had arranged for caterers, decorators, even a string quartet. Everything looked beautiful and festive. Lewis spent 2 hours walking the property, noting exits, checking the surveillance Detective Ayala's team had installed. Everything was ready. Caroline arrived at 6, dressed in an emerald green gown that had cost Lewis 3 months' salary. She looked stunning. She also looked excited, like a predator finally cornering its prey. This is perfect, she said, kissing him. You've outdone yourself. Only the best for you, Lewis said. He meant it as irony. She took it as devotion. The party started at 7. 20 guests, Caroline's work friends, a few of Lewis's co-workers from the rig, people from town. all witnesses to the happy couple celebrating together. Louis played the doting husband, making toasts, dancing with his wife, laughing at jokes. At 8:30, McKay arrived, fashionably late. He handed Caroline a wrapped box. "Happy birthday," he said, his eyes meeting hers with meaning. Inside was a vintage bottle of wine. Louis recognized the label. It had been Miriam's favorite. "How thoughtful," Caroline said, smiling at McKay with just a hint of something more. "Louis, would you open it?" "In the kitchen." The kitchen was in the back of the house, away from the guests. Louis went willingly, McKay following. Caroline stayed with the party. The kitchen was dark. Louis flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. "Electrical problems," McKay said behind him. "Old house." Louis turned. McKay was holding a gun. "You know what's funny?" McKay said conversationally. "Caroline actually grew to like you. Said you were kind, good with Becky. Made her almost regret this." "Almost, but not quite," Louis said calmly. "Money's a wonderful motivator. Miriam's estate is worth $14 million. Split 2 ways instead of 3. You understand." "I do, which is why I'm disappointed you thought this would work." McKay frowned. "What?" Louis raised his voice slightly. "Now, detective." The lights came on. Detective Santiago Ayala stepped out of the pantry, weapon drawn, 2 uniformed officers behind him. "Neil McKay, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud." Ayala moved forward. "Drop the weapon." McKay's face went white. He dropped the gun, stumbling backward. "You can't, this isn't." "We have everything," Louis said. "Every email, every photo, every bank transfer. Roger's been documenting your crimes for months. And tonight, you and Caroline just tried to murder me in front of 20 witnesses and 3 hidden cameras." In the main room, Louis heard Caroline's voice raise in alarm as more officers moved in. The guests' confusion turned to gasps as Caroline McCann was handcuffed, her perfect facade finally cracking. Louis walked out to face her. She saw him, and her expression twisted from shock to pure rage. "You bastard," she hissed. "I gave you everything. You gave me lies," Louis said quietly. "And you tried to take my daughter's father. You really thought I'd just let that happen. Roger was the one. Roger saved my life. You tried to end it. There's a difference." Caroline lunged at him, screaming. The officers held her back as she shrieked obscenities, her composure completely shattered. This was the real Caroline, Louis realized. The monster underneath the makeup. McKay, by contrast, had gone silent, his lawyer's mind already calculating plea deals and defense strategies. But Louis knew the evidence was insurmountable. They were finished. As the police led them away, Louis stood in the decorated Brennan estate, surrounded by confused party guests and abandoned champagne glasses. Detective Ayala approached. "That was risky," the detective said. "They could have shot you before we moved in." They had to incriminate themselves fully. Just conspiracy charges might not stick. But attempted murder with witnesses? Louis shook his head. They walked right into it. Roger will be released tomorrow. Medical evaluation shows he's competent, just devastated by grief and family betrayal. The DA's not pressing charges. Good. He deserves that much. Ayala studied him. "What will you do now?" Louis thought about Becky, safe with her grandparents. About the life he'd built that had turned out to be constructed on lies. About the fact that he'd almost died because his wife wanted money more than she wanted him. "I'm going to get my daughter," he said, "and we're going to start over. Somewhere Caroline can never touch us again." 2 months later, Louis stood in Roger's hospital room as the old man prepared for discharge. The eye damage was permanent. Roger would never see clearly again, but he was alive, free, and remarkably at peace. "The estate is yours," Roger said, speaking carefully around his injuries. "Miriam's will stipulate that if Caroline is proven unfit, control passes to you as Becky's guardian. My lawyers have already processed the paperwork." "I don't want your money," Louis said. "It's not my money. It's Miriam's. She wanted it to protect a child. Let protect Becky." Roger smiled sadly. "I failed Charlie. I won't fail my granddaughter." Louis considered. $14 million. Enough to give Becky any life she wanted. college, travel, security. All from the grandmother she'd never known, protected by the grandfather who'd tried to save them both. "Thank you," Louis said finally. Roger reached out, and Louis took his hand. "I'm sorry I didn't believe in you sooner," Roger said. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for." "You taught me something," Louis said. "Sometimes the best move is the one nobody expects." "What will you tell Becky?" About her mother. Louis had thought about this constantly. Becky knew Caroline was in jail, but not why. How do you tell a 9-year-old that her mother tried to kill her father? "I'll tell her the truth, eventually. Age-appropriate truth. That her mother made bad choices and hurt people, including us. That sometimes people we love disappoint us." Louis looked at Roger. "And that her grandfather loved her enough to risk everything to save her." Roger's scarred face crumpled. "I don't deserve." "You do. You made mistakes, but when it mattered, you fought for her. That's what she'll remember." They sat together in silence. Two men broken and rebuilt by the same woman's cruelty, now bound by their determination to protect the little girl who'd survived it all. Caroline and Neil McKay's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded phone calls, emails, bank statements, Roger's documentation, and the attempted murder with police witnesses. Both were convicted on multiple counts. McKay got 25 years. Caroline got 30, her sentence enhanced by the cold calculation of her crimes and her attempt to harm her own child's father. Louis didn't attend the trial. He didn't need to see her face again. Detective Ayala sent him updates, and that was enough. What Louis did do was take Becky to therapy, a good therapist named Dr. Judith Ash who specialized in childhood trauma. Slowly, carefully, Becky started to process what had happened. She had nightmares about the theater, but they became less frequent. She asked about Caroline sometimes, and Louis told her the truth in small pieces. Mommy did something very bad. Mommy is in a place where she can't hurt anyone anymore. Mommy won't be coming home. Do you miss her? Becky asked one night. Louis thought about it honestly. I miss who I thought she was. But that person wasn't real. The real person hurt us. So no, I don't miss the real her. I don't miss her either, Becky said quietly. Is that okay? It's more than okay, baby. It's honest. Louis sold their old house and moved to a different city, using Miriam's money to buy a modest home in a good school district. He quit the oil rig job, too much time away from Becky, and started a small business renovating houses. Matthew moved with them, becoming Louis's business partner and Becky's surrogate uncle. Roger came too, once he was healthy enough. He lived in the guest house, a quiet presence who spent his days in the garden and his evenings reading to Becky. The little girl had been hesitant at first, but Roger was patient. He let her set the pace. And slowly, carefully, they built something real. One afternoon, Louis found them in the garden, Roger's scarred hands showing Becky how to prune roses. Grandpa says you have to cut away the dead parts so the healthy parts can grow, Becky said, concentrating on her work. Your grandpa's right, Louis said, watching them. Roger looked up, his damaged eyes meeting Louis's. There was understanding there, gratitude, and something like redemption. They were all cutting away dead parts. Caroline, McKay, the lies, the fear. Cutting them away so what remained could grow. 5 years passed. Becky turned 14, bright and resilient and fiercely independent. She'd inherited Caroline's beauty, but Louis's character and Roger's quiet strength. She knew her mother was in prison. She knew what Caroline had done, and she'd made peace with it in the way that children do, accepting the facts, then moving forward. I'm going to visit her, Becky announced one Saturday morning. Louis lowered his coffee cup. Your mother? Yeah. The prison allows supervised visits. I've been thinking about it. Becky sat down across from him. I'm not going to forgive her or anything, but I want to see her. Tell her I survived. That we all survived. You don't owe her anything. I know. That's why I want to do it. Because I don't owe her, so if I visit, it's my choice. My power. Louis studied his daughter. She was so much stronger than he'd been at 14. Stronger than he'd been at 30. Do you want me to come with you? Would you? Of course. They visited Caroline the following month. The prison was gray and sterile, smelling of disinfectant and despair. Caroline appeared behind the glass partition looking older, harder, her beauty eroded by years and guilt. She cried when she saw Becky. "You're so grown up." "Yeah." Becky's voice was steady. "I am. I'm sorry," Caroline said, the words tumbling out. "I'm so sorry for everything. I was selfish and cruel and—" "You tried to kill my dad," Becky interrupted. "You teamed up with your boyfriend to murder him and steal Grandma's money. You scare me at the theater. You made me think my grandpa was a monster when he was trying to save us." Caroline's face crumpled. I know. I was sick. I wasn't thinking. You were thinking fine. You just didn't care." Becky stood. "I came here to tell you that I don't need you. I have Dad and Grandpa Roger and Uncle Matthew. I have a good life. You tried to destroy it, and you failed. That's all I wanted to say." "Becky, please." "Goodbye, Caroline." Becky walked away. Louis followed, but not before meeting Caroline's eyes one last time. There was nothing to say. She'd made her choices. Now she'd live with them. In the parking lot, Becky cried. Louis held her while she sobbed, releasing years of anger and hurt and grief. When she was finished, she wiped her eyes and smiled. "I feel better," she said. Yeah, like I finally closed the door." She took his hand. "Can we get ice cream?" Louis laughed. "Absolutely." They drove to the ice cream shop, singing along to the radio, and Louis thought about Roger's wisdom about cutting away dead parts. Becky had just done that. Cut away the last connection to Caroline's poison. She was free now. They all were. The final chapter came 7 years later. Louis received a letter from the prison. Caroline was dying. Cancer, same as her mother. She'd requested to see Becky one last time. Becky was 21 now, in college, studying psychology with the goal of helping children like herself. She read the letter and handed it back. "No," she said simply. "You sure?" Louis asked. "I already said goodbye. I don't need to do it again." Becky shrugged. "She's dying, and that's sad. But she made her choices. I'm making mine." Caroline died 3 weeks later. Louis didn't attend the funeral. Neither did Becky or Roger. They marked her passing quietly at home, then moved on with their lives. Roger died peacefully 2 years after that, in his sleep, in the guest house he'd made his home. Becky and Louis buried him next to Miriam and Charlie. The family reunited at last. On his gravestone, they put, "Beloved grandfather." He made mistakes, but when it mattered, he did right. At the funeral, Becky, now Dr. Rebecca McCann, child psychologist, gave the eulogy. She talked about redemption, about how people could change, about how love, real love, meant protecting people even when it cost you everything. Louis stood beside her, Matthew on his other side, and thought about the night in the theater when everything had changed. The knife being sharpened, Becky's whispered warning, the coffee burning his hand as he threw it. He'd been terrified that night, certain he was going to die, that Becky was going to be hurt, that everything was ending. Instead, everything had begun. Roger's attempt to warn him, however clumsy and dangerous, had set off a chain reaction. Louis had discovered the truth. He'd fought back. He'd won. And in winning, he'd saved not just himself, but Becky and even Roger. The antagonists, Caroline and McKay, had paid for their crimes. They'd lost everything they'd schemed for. Caroline had died in prison, bitter and alone. McKay was still there, would be for another decade at least. The victory hadn't been easy, but it had been earned. And Louis had his daughter, had a life built on truth instead of lies, had the satisfaction of knowing he'd been smart enough, strong enough, and badass enough to beat people who'd underestimated him. As the funeral ended and people dispersed, Becky hugged him tightly. "Love you, Dad," she said. "Love you too, kiddo." They walked to the car together, father and daughter, survivors and victors. Behind them, Roger's grave stood peaceful in the afternoon sun. And somewhere in a prison cemetery, Caroline's unmarked stone gathered dust, forgotten by everyone who mattered. Louis had won, not just survival, but everything that came after. And that, he thought, was the best revenge of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, Check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.